Louisiana Legends is made possible by Blue Cross and Blue Shield of Louisiana. This important program series enables us to discover, through the accomplishments of our fellow Louisianians, the unique character of a state so proudly served by Blue Cross and Blue Shield of Louisiana for 60 years.
1900, 1,700 Negroes attend college. 1944, 40,000 colored people attend college. 1970, 522,000 blacks attend college. 1992, 1,393,000 African Americans attend college. In the words of Maya Angelou, still I rise. I'm with William H. Gray, Dr. William H. Gray III, President and Chief Executive Officer of the United Negro College Fund, a position that he's held since 1991. Dr. Gray hails from Baton Rouge, Louisiana. What early memories of Baton Rouge and growing up?
Oh, I have a lot of wonderful memories. I was born at Lady of the Lake Hospital. My father was a professor at Southern University. My mother had been a graduate of Southern, and her entire family lived in Baton Rouge, 949 North 20th Street. And even though I was just born there, I was immediately transported to Tallahassee, Florida, where my father became president of Florida A&M, and before that, Florida Memorial. So I was born in Louisiana and then went to Florida. But every summer, I would come home to Baton Rouge and spend my summers at 949 North 20th Street. And boy, do I have some great memories. I mean, we had this wonderful old shotgun house that was typical of the South, you know, where you could look straight from the front door out the back door.
Yes, sir.
A modest place. My grandfather was a professor at Southern. My grandmother taught, I think it was called Scott Street School, which was right behind the house. You could literally walk out the backyard, and of course, in those days, everybody had a little chicken coop and a garden, so you walked out the backyard, through the chicken coop, through the garden, and there you were at the school. And every summer I'd go there, and it was just wonderful. I mean, the things I remember on Saturday evenings, making homemade ice cream. I remember the big oak tree with the swing that, you know, I used to just love to swing in. I remember the wonderful front porch swing where Grandma used to sit me down and teach me the lessons of life, and help to interpret life for me. I remember down at the corner of North 20th Street, there was this huge oak tree where all the roots were exposed. You know, looking like 1,000 reptiles covering the whole corner, and there was this restaurant, a Greasy Spoon. And I used to make my grandmother mad by saying, Grandma, let's get dinner from the Greasy Spoon, and, you know, want some pork chops and red beans and rice and sausage. And no, I have wonderful memories of Baton Rouge and my childhood and spending the summers there. And then one year, when I was about 8 years old, when my father left Florida to go to Philadelphia, I spent a year in Baton Rouge at my grandma's house going to Scott Street School. And at that time, my mother served as dean at Southern University. And so I remember going to school there for 1 year. So I got a part of my schooling right there in Baton Rouge. So I have nothing but wonderful memories.
Dr. Gray, you spring, though, from a rather astonishing family. The background is one of education, isn't it? And working in institutions of higher learning. It's so interesting that you would have this present position.
Well, you know, people who really know my family were not surprised when I left Congress to take over the College Fund, because my father had been president of two historically black colleges, Florida Memorial and then Florida A&M. Before that, he had been a professor at Southern. That's where he met my mother. He was a professor at 21. He graduated from college at 18 and got his master's degree from Penn in chemistry, and he was teaching chemistry when he met one of his students and fell in love. They got married and went to Philadelphia, where he worked on his PhD, and she got a master's degree. So higher education, I've always grown up around it. My father taught, my mother taught, my grandfather was a teacher, my grandmother was an elementary school teacher. So for me, education was a very important endeavor something that was really a high calling and something that was very important to my community. And ministry was the other shoe.
Well, I was going to ask you, when did ministry enter the picture?
Well, back in those days, if you wanted to be a college president, you had to be a minister. And so my father was a minister. And when he left the active college presidency to go to Philadelphia, he became the minister of the Bright Hope Baptist Church. He succeeded his father, who had been there 40-some years. And today, I am the pastor of that same church. I am the third gray to pastor Bright Hope Baptist Church. I've been there 24 years.
Sir, how do you do it from Washington, where your responsibilities are immense?
Well, first of all, I have an excellent board. And two, I have excellent staff. There are 3 ministers, and I am the senior preaching minister, all during Congress, and even now. I go back every weekend and preach. I still do half of the weddings, half of the funerals, and that's really, if you look at my life, the only consistent job I've ever had that I've never changed is being a parish minister. From the time I was 23 until today, I was a minister in Montclair, New Jersey, then went back to my home church. Now, I've done a lot of other things on the side. I was a college professor, taught at 5 universities. Then I went into politics, ran for Congress, and won.
We're going to talk about that. How did you get it? All right, so you're a minister, and that's obviously the kind of the keystone of your life, because it's the constant, you said, wherein you have not deviated. How then does a minister and an educator get interested in this rough, tough, brutal world of politics?
Well, African American ministers, and to some degree educators, are involved in what I call survival ministries and survival education, where a people who are oppressed, disadvantaged, and you've got to remember, I grew up in another America. The America I grew up was the segregated apartheid America, where when I was a kid in New Orleans and in Louisiana and in Baton Rouge, I couldn't go to the movie theater except to sit in the segregated section. I couldn't go to the restaurants downtown. I couldn't stay in the hotels. I couldn't go to certain churches in Baton Rouge. Had to go to Mount Zion Baptist Church, the Black Baptist Church, because the white Baptist
Reverend
Church,
Jemison.
That's right, because the white Baptist churches wouldn't allow someone of my color to come, regardless of my Christianity or my credo beliefs. That's the America I grew up in.
Did segregation ever shake your faith in God?
No.
Never did.
Because the minister in our community dealt with not only the soul salvation, but bodily salvation. And if you go back, it's not surprising when you understand it that the Civil Rights Movement, Martin Luther King Jr., economic movements came out of the black church because that's where we learned our lessons of leadership. That's where we learned our economic lessons. That was where we produced our first independent leadership before apartheid broke down. The other place was the historically black college, where we had our own institutions, our own faculty, our own leadership. And so the two of them were involved in that. So for me to make the transition from ministry, education to politics was not that difficult.
Sir, how then did you decide to embark on it? Where were you when you decided to embark on a political career?
Well, I had been the pastor of a church in Montclair, New Jersey, which is a suburban northern New Jersey community, mainly a bedroom community for New York City and for Newark. A wonderful church that I had the opportunity to pastor, and I taught at several universities. And then I went back to my home church after my father died. They called me to be the minister, and I couldn't turn down the people who raised me. And so I went back there, and I suddenly found myself getting involved in community affairs and talking about what was wrong with the policies. And so people said, why don't you do something? Instead of shooting off your mouth, why don't you run for office? So I ran for Congress. I'd never held any political office, had never been involved in any political party, and I won.
Well, you did a little more than win. Dr. Gray became the highest-ranking African-American to serve in the Congress of the United States, and I don't think anybody has even come close to that record today. You were chairman of the Democratic Caucus, and you were majority whip. That's rather astonishing. There weren't that many African Americans in the Congress of the United States.
No, when I went there, there were about 9. When I left, there were 23. I served As the freshman steering and policy representative, I became chairman of the budget committee back in the middle of the Reagan years, which shook everybody up because it was right after Ronald Reagan decimated Mondale in '84 and won, like 49 states, and the Democratic caucus elects a black from the Northeast with progressive viewpoints to be the chief economic spokesperson. And then I became the caucus chair and then the majority whip. And when people ask me, well, Bill, for a guy who had no political experience, you never were a state rep, state senator, mayor, nothing, how did you do that? And I said, I don't know. I said, I guess, when you're a Baptist preacher, you sort of believe you can do anything. And with God's help, you sort of think that you can scale any mountain and do whatever you want to do. And so I had the audacity. I mean, really, it was almost like I didn't know any better. I didn't know I was supposed to sit there and be quiet. I didn't know I was supposed to wait my turn in line. I didn't know the rules. And so because I didn't know the rules, I broke the rules, I think in a positive way, by running and said, look, I know how to chair the budget committee. And that was a committee that you got elected to. You didn't win it by seniority. It was the only committee that was elected in the entire House. And then after winning every one of the budget fights for 4 years, pulling the Democratic Party, where for the first time we had liberals and boll weevils and moderates voting for the same budgets, I then ran for chairman of the caucus, won that, and then majority whip. And I think the reason it happened was because I just didn't know the rules. I didn't know you were supposed to follow traditions. And I believe that my faith that you could do anything you want to do if you set your mind to it and try to do it right. So,
how did you feel when this position as president and chief executive officer of the United Negro College Fund came along? How did you feel about that?
Well, the first time someone approached me about it and raised the issue with me, I said, nah, you got to be kidding. I'm the majority whip. I'm the highest ranking African American in the history of the United States who ever served in the House of Representatives. And, no, I don't want to do that. And then the person who approached me the first time, about 6 months later, saw me and again said, look, I know you're not interested, but let me talk to you about it. And the person knew my family background. He knew that I came from a family of educators and preachers, and he knew that years ago I started out wanting to have two ministries, a preaching ministry and a teaching ministry. And he talked about what it would be like for somebody of my stature to come and take whatever I'd learned and raise the money to send a new generation of disadvantaged kids to college, to strengthen these institutions that have been basic bridges over troubled waters. And after a while, I really got to thinking about it, and I called him back. I said, let's talk about that. And after talking about it and talking with my wife, I decided that I could make a more important contribution to America and to my own community by returning to the roots of education and producing another majority whip, producing a Nobel laureate, producing doctors, teachers, and business people who could make America strong as we go into the 21st century, and to take these institutions that are marvelous with their capability to transform people. At our colleges, the UNCF colleges, we like to say we know how to take diamonds and make them more brilliant, like Harvard, like Yale, and the prestigious schools. We've been doing it for years when the other schools wouldn't allow us in. But we know how to do something they don't. We know how to take a lump of coal and turn it into a diamond.
Oh, that's wonderful.
And that is take a disadvantaged kid who doesn't always come fully prepared, who the normal testing methodology doesn't show what their real aptitude is, and give them an opportunity to be nurtured, to be inspired, and to become doctors and lawyers, very much like the early immigrant colleges did, like Fordham, St. John, like Brandeis, Yeshiva, like some of the early religious schools like Brigham Young did.
Let me say that at least anyone questioned this brilliant man's ability to raise money since he's been the head of this organization. He's raised $1/3 of $1 billion. That's a lot of money for any cause.
Well, I don't spend much time counting how much we raise. I spend the time counting how many more students need an education and what the need is. And so even though we've helped to make this college fund more successful in terms of dollars raised, it's still not enough. There are just thousands of young people out there living in our cities, living in our rural areas, living in the bayous, in the rural areas, who are just dying to lift themselves if they could get a pair of educational bootstraps.
Let me ask you a question, a general question. I, a white Southerner, with demands made on me from organizations, religious, civic, and so on, why should Gus Weill put a check in the mail for the United Negro College Fund?
Several good reasons. First of all of our colleges are open to every student, every child in America. And in fact, our colleges are more integrated than America's majority colleges. Black colleges have an 11% white student enrollment compared to only 6% black student enrollment in white colleges. Our faculty is 25% white compared to only 2% of the white colleges faculty being black. Our administrators are 16% white compared to only 1% of America's white colleges. So when you invest in us, you're also investing in a place that is providing opportunity not just for black kids, don't get hung up on the name, but for any kid who needs nurturing, who doesn't have a lot of money, and who doesn't always come with all of the immediate skills needed. The second reason why you ought to invest in us is because we do something unique in higher education. We take some of the most disadvantaged kids and give them an opportunity to become productive citizens. Whenever you can take somebody who's disadvantaged and give them the skill to teach, to heal, to be business leaders, to be entrepreneurs, that benefits all of us. I don't care who you are, whether you're white, black, green, purple. I don't care whether you live in Louisiana or whether you live in Seattle, Washington. The fact of the matter is that's an investment in your future. Especially and thirdly, when you look at the fact that in the next century, more and more of the workforce that we're going to need to support old-timers like you and me are going to be minorities and women. So those institutions that do a good job of training minorities and women, we better be investing in, because in the next century, they're going to be the majority of the workforce who are going to have to make America prosperous and be competitive in a global marketplace. So that's why you ought to give. And then finally, there's another good reason. A mind is a terrible thing to waste.
Oh, that brilliant slogan. Who originated that? As a writer, I would love to have written it.
A young man who worked for an advertising agency in New York City about 21 years ago came up with that slogan. Now, let me just say, we know it's grammatically incorrect. You know, a mind is not a thing. But we want to remind the audience that it's a slogan. Like all advertising slogans, it isn't supposed to be grammatically correct. It's supposed to be catchy and remind you about something. And that is that when we don't develop our brains, something is wasting in our society and wasting in us as individuals. So it's been a very popular slogan, and we love it because it does very succinctly symbolize what an investment in the college fund is about. It's making sure that those minds out there get developed. And with those minds, hands. And with those hands, contributions to the whole of American society.
Doctor, I can't think of an arena wherein I would want to compete with you. I would lose my voice and my tongue. A question. You served as a president, you took time out and served as President Clinton's special advisor on Haiti. How'd you get involved in that?
Well, long story. I got a call from the National Security Advisor who asked me would I talk to him about Haiti. And I said, well, you know, what is it you want to know? And he said, Bill, when you were in Congress, most people remember you as Majority Whip, caucus chairman, and the budget guy, macroeconomics. But I remember that you were also on the Foreign Affairs Committee, the Foreign Operations Committee. You wrote the sanction bill for South Africa. You got it passed. You were very much involved in a lot of foreign stuff. And we just want to know what you think about what the policy is. I told them very candidly what I thought. It wasn't stuff that they wanted to hear. And so then I got a call from the Secretary of State who wanted to also talk with me. And I told him very candidly what I thought of the policy and what I thought had needed to be done. And then the next thing I did is I got a request from the Secretary of State who said the President wanted to talk to me about the possibility of me coming on as a part of his team as an ambassador or secretary, an assistant secretary or something like that. And I basically said, no, I can't do that. I will not leave UNCF, but I will be more than happy to help out in a crisis and serve my country. The president called. We talked 3 or 4 times about Haiti, what I thought ought to be done. And then he said, well, look, if you won't come join the team in a full-time capacity, can we get your time somehow? And I said, yes. I said, you can make me a non-compensated advisor. And so for about 5 months, I served as the president's advisor from about May 8th to the middle of October. That was the period where we changed the policy totally, dealt with the refugees in a very humane way, set up an international solution that involved other countries, got the UN to oversee it, and then we applied sanctions, and then got the United Nations to join in an international approach that eventually led to a peaceful resolution, even though we had to threaten an invasion. And I traveled with President Aristide and Secretary Christopher to take Aristide back. And when I finished, on the next day I went to the White House and said, Mr. President, democracy is restored. I've done my duty to my country, and I've got to go back and spend full time at the College Fund.
Sir, how are Black Americans doing in 1996?
They're doing well in some respects, but in many respects they're not doing well. In some respects, such as individual accomplishment and achievement, new frontiers, yes. The Bill Cosbys, the Oprah Winfreys, the Shaq O'Neals, the Michael Jordan, stuff that you didn't see 15, 20 years ago. Business leaders like Ken Chenault, Vice Chairman of American Express, Barry Rand at Xerox, Dick Parsons, the COO and President of Time Warner, the number 2 position. You're beginning to see some individual change. And it's significant. But on the other hand, when you look at the great masses of the African American community, you see many of the residues and problems that continue to plague us and have down through the years. Even though unemployment dropped to an all-time low recently, black male unemployment is still double digit. When you look at the black family median income, there's still a significant gap between it and white family income. And you can't just attribute that simply to educational opportunities. You've got to attribute it to the fact that there have been historic barriers. Yes, we've removed a lot of them, but there are still barriers, de facto bigotry and discrimination that is at work. And so we've come a long way, and you can see that. I mean, when I go back down to Louisiana and see what has happened in Baton Rouge, yes, and see the number of African Americans serving in the state legislature, see them in public office, you know, sheriffs, supervisors, and
the mayor of New Orleans.
Mayor of New Orleans, Mark Morial. I remember when Mark was a freshman at the University of Pennsylvania, and I was in Congress, and I went to address his fraternity, and he came up and introduced himself. Boy, I'm getting old. And and of course, I knew his father. And to see that, that's progress. But many people take that as saying, we've arrived. The playing field is level. We don't need to continue to redress the 300 years of past discrimination. And what I see is the best of all times and the worst of all times, to use a Dickinson phrase. And what we've got to do in this country is we can't turn back the clock and say the field is level. We all know it's not. What we've got to do is continue to try to level it. And if there are remedies that don't seem to be doing it, or remedies that are having adverse effect, don't just throw them out and say the field is level when we all know it's not. Let's find a way to keep working at the problem. Because the fundamental fact is that as this country moves into the 21st century, we're going to need more and more of each other to be prosperous and to compete in that global marketplace.
Dr. Gray, we've run out of time, and I would love to hear one of those sermons in Philadelphia. But thank you so much for seeing us, and you're quite an extraordinary man, and I'm glad to have had this opportunity.
Well, I'm proud to be from Louisiana.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. Thank you, Doctor.
Louisiana Legends is made possible by Blue Cross and Blue Shield of Louisiana. This important program series enables us to discover, through the accomplishments of our fellow Louisianians, the unique character of a state so proudly served by Blue Cross and Blue Shield of Louisiana for 60 years.
For a copy of this program, call 1-800-973-7246 or send 1995 to Louisiana Legends, care of Louisiana Public Broadcasting, 7860 Anselmo Lane, Baton Rouge, Louisiana, 70810. Please allow 4 to 6 weeks for delivery.